Hello everyone, and welcome to Files of Fear. Tonight we peer deep into the shadows of America's highways with 8 authentic trucker horror stories, each one more disturbing than the last. These accounts have been sourced from professional drivers who have traveled through the loneliest stretches and the darkest corners of our nation. What you are about to hear is not fiction or mere rumor, because once tonight's first story begins, you may not feel alone again. Subscribe to Files of Fear for more disturbing encounters, unexplained mysteries, and true horror stories. Now, let us begin. I've been driving big rigs for nearly 15 years now, and I thought I had seen everything the road could throw at me. Bad weather, aggressive drivers, mechanical failures in the middle of nowhere, you name it. But what happened to me on Interstate 40 through Arkansas 3 years ago still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, remembering that voice on the CB radio and what almost happened to me that night. It was late October around 2:00 in the morning, and I was hauling a load of electronics from Little Rock to Oklahoma City. The stretch of Interstate 40 through Arkansas can be pretty desolate at night, especially between Russellville and Fort Smith. Just endless black woods on both sides of the highway, with maybe a truck every 10 or 15 minutes passing in the opposite direction. The kind of isolation that most people never experience unless they drive truck for a living. I had been on the road since 6:00 that morning, so I was getting pretty tired. My eyes were starting to burn, and I was fighting to keep them open. I was maybe 40 mi outside of Fort Smith when I heard the voice come over the CB radio, Channel 19, the trucker channel that we all monitor. It was a woman's voice, and she sounded absolutely terrified. "Please, somebody help me," she was saying, her voice breaking like she was crying. "My car broke down and I am stuck on the side of the road. There is something wrong with my engine and I cannot get it started. I'm scared to death out here by myself. Please, if anybody can hear this, I need help." Now, I have a daughter about the same age as this girl sounded, maybe early 20s, and my heart just went out to her. I know how dangerous it can be for a young woman to be stranded alone on a dark highway in the middle of the night. I grabbed my CB handset and responded immediately. "This is Sooner Express eastbound on I-40, I said using my company name. "I can hear you, miss. What is your location? I can stop and help you out." The relief in her voice was immediate. "Oh, thank God, thank you so much. I'm at mile marker 62 eastbound side. I have my hazard lights on, but my phone is dead. And I have been sitting here for almost an hour. I was starting to think nobody would ever stop. Mile marker 62 was only about 12 mi ahead of me, so I told her I would be there in about 10 minutes. She thanked me probably 6 times, and I could hear her crying with relief. I felt good about being able to help someone in trouble the way other truckers had helped me over the years when I needed it. As I got closer to mile marker 62, I started slowing down and looking for her hazard lights. I could see them flashing about a 4 mile ahead. A small car pulled over on the right shoulder. I put my four-ways on and started pulling over behind her, giving myself plenty of room so traffic could see us both. That was when I noticed something that made me pause. The car was positioned perfectly straight on the shoulder, not at an angle like you would expect from someone who had limped off the road with engine trouble. The hazard lights were flashing, but they looked too bright, too new. Most importantly, there was no steam or smoke coming from under the hood, which you would normally see with an overheated engine. I sat there in my cab for a moment, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. Something felt off about the whole situation, but I could not put my finger on exactly what it was. Maybe I was just being paranoid because it was so late and I was tired. I grabbed my CB again. "I am the truck behind you with the flashers," I said. "Are you okay, miss?" Her voice came back immediately, but now there was something different about it. The crying was gone and she sounded almost eager. "Yes, I am fine now that you're here. Can you come up to my car? I think there might be something wrong with my engine belt." That was the moment I knew something was very wrong. No stranded motorist talks about engine belts at 2:00 in the morning, especially not a young woman who had been crying with fear just minutes before. I looked more carefully at the car ahead of me, and that was when I saw movement in the woods on the right side of the highway. There were at least 2 figures moving between the trees, maybe more. They were trying to stay hidden, but I could see them shifting positions, getting closer to the road. My blood went cold as I realized what was happening. This was not a breakdown. This was a setup. I grabbed my CB handset, but before I could say anything, the woman's voice came over the radio again. Except this time it was completely different. The scared, crying girl was gone, replaced by someone who sounded cold and calculating. "Come on up here, driver. We know you can see us. Do not make this harder than it has to be." I threw my truck into gear and hit the gas, pulling back onto the highway as fast as 18 wheels and 40,000 lb of cargo would allow. In my mirrors, I could see figures running out of the woods toward the road, but they were too late. I was already accelerating away from them. My CB crackled to life again, but now it was a man's voice, angry and full of profanity. He was calling me every name in the book and making threats about what they were going to do to me if they ever caught up with me. I switched to channel 17 and started calling for any other drivers in the area. "This is Sooner Expressbound on I-40 near mile marker 62. There are people trying to ambush trucks at that location. Do not stop if you see a broken down car with hazards flashing. Repeat, it is a trap." A voice came back immediately. It was another trucker. Sounded like an older guy. "Copy that, Sooner Express. This is Maverick hauling westbound about 20 m from your location. I am calling the Arkansas State Police right now. Are you safe?" "I'm safe for now," I responded, but there were at least 3 or 4 people involved, and they had CB equipment. They are probably still monitoring this channel. Sure enough, the angry voice came back over channel 19, making more threats and telling us that they knew these highways better than any cops did. The other trucker and I both switched to channel 17 and kept in contact until we passed each other going in opposite directions. About 30 minutes later, I heard Arkansas State Police on my CB asking for the driver who had reported the attempted ambush. I identified myself and gave them my location. They told me they had units responding to mile marker 62 and asked if I would be willing to meet them at the next truck stop to give a statement. I met the troopers at a Flying J outside of Fort Smith, and what they told me made my blood run cold all over again. This was not the first time something like this had happened on that stretch of highway. There had been 3 other incidents in the past 6 months, all involving fake breakdowns and CB radios used to lure truckers into stopping. In one case, a driver from Tennessee had been beaten and robbed after stopping to help what he thought was a stranded motorist. In another case, a driver had been lucky enough to get suspicious and drive away just like I had. But the third case was the worst. A driver from Missouri had simply disappeared. His truck was found abandoned at mile marker 58, just 4 miles from where they had tried to ambush me. The driver was never found. The troopers told me they suspected this was the same group, and that they had probably moved their operation a few miles down the highway after the other incidents had made that area too hot. They were targeting truckers specifically because we carry cash, expensive CB equipment, and sometimes valuable cargo. Plus, they knew truckers were more likely to stop and help someone in trouble because that is just the culture of the road. When the troopers got to mile marker 62, the car was gone, and there was no sign of the ambushers, but they did find tire tracks in the woods where vehicles had been hidden and cigarette butts that suggested people had been waiting there for hours. I gave the troopers my statement and contact information, and they told me they would call if they needed anything else. As I was walking back to my truck, one of the younger troopers pulled me aside. "You were smart to get out of there when you did," he said. "These people are not just looking to rob trucks based on what happened to that Missouri driver. I think they are capable of a lot worse." I finished my run to Oklahoma City, but I could not stop thinking about what had almost happened. The scariest part was how convincing that woman's voice had been at first. She had sounded genuinely terrified and desperate for help. If I had not noticed the suspicious things about her car and the movement in the woods, I probably would have walked right into their trap. Since that night, I have completely changed how I respond to calls for help on the CB radio. I still want to help people, but now I am much more careful about it. If someone claims to be broken down, I call the state police first and let them handle it. If it is a legitimate emergency, the cops can get there faster than I can anyway. If it is a trap, then I have potentially saved another driver from walking into it. I also installed a dash camera system that records everything in front of and behind my truck, and I upgraded my CB radio to one that can record conversations. If something like this ever happens again, I want to have evidence that the police can use. The Arkansas State Police never caught the people who tried to ambush me that night. About 6 months later, they called to tell me that the incidents had stopped. So, they suspected the group had either moved to a different area or gotten arrested for something else. But they warned me that there are probably other groups out there using similar tactics. That is the part that really gets to me. How many other fake breakdowns are happening out there on dark highways? How many other drivers have got that same scared woman's voice over their CB radio only to drive into a trap? And how many drivers have not been as lucky as I was to notice the warning signs in time? These days, when I drive past mile marker 62 on I-40, I always slow down and look carefully at the woods on the right side of the highway. Sometimes I imagine I can still see shadows moving between the trees, waiting for the next trucker who's willing to stop and help a stranger in trouble. It is a terrible thing when your natural desire to help people becomes something that criminals can use against you. I still drive the same routes and I still monitor channel 19 on my CB radio. But now, every time I hear someone calling for help, I remember that scared woman's voice and how quickly it changed into something cold and threatening. Trust is something that takes years to build and seconds to destroy. And those people destroyed my ability to trust a voice on the radio asking for help. That is the real tragedy of what they did to me that night. They did not just try to rob me or hurt me. They took away my faith in the basic decency of people who need help on the highway. I've been driving truck for 8 years now, and I learned early on that picking up hitchhikers is generally a bad idea. Most trucking companies have strict policies against it, and for good reason. You never know who you might be letting into your cab, and once they're in there with you, you are stuck with them until the next place you can safely stop. But sometimes your human decency overrides your common sense, and you make a decision that you will regret for the rest of your life. This happened to me about 2 years ago on Highway 287 through the Texas Panhandle. I was hauling a load of agricultural equipment from Amarillo down to Beaumont, a run I had made dozens of times before. It was early June, and the weather had been building up to something nasty all afternoon. By the time I got outside of Childress, the sky was black as cold, and the wind was picking up something fierce. The radio had been talking about severe thunderstorm warnings all day with possible tornadoes and golf ball-sized hail. I was hoping to get through the worst of it before the storm really hit, but Mother Nature had other plans. Around 7:00 in the evening, just as I was passing through the middle of absolutely nowhere, the bottom fell out of the sky. I'm talking about rain so hard you could barely see 10 ft in front of your truck, even with the wipers on high. The wind was rocking my trailer back and forth, and I was having to fight the steering wheel just to keep it between the ditches. Lightning was striking so close I could feel the electricity in the air, and the thunder was loud enough to rattle my teeth. I was looking for somewhere safe to pull over and wait out the worst of it when I saw her standing on the side of the road. She was maybe 100 yards ahead of me, just a dark figure in the rain with her thumb out. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, cause who in their right mind would be hitchhiking in weather like that? But as I got closer, I could see it was a woman, probably in her 30s, soaked to the bone and shivering. My first instinct was to keep driving. Company policy was clear, and this storm was dangerous enough without adding complications. But then I saw the look on her face as my headlights hit her. She was not just wet and cold. She was terrified. She looked like someone who had been running from something, and the desperation in her eyes made my heart ache. I pulled over and rolled down my passenger window. She ran up to the truck and I could see she was shaking all over. Whether from cold or fear, I could not tell. "Please help me," she shouted over the storm. My car broke down about 5 mi back and I have been walking in this weather for over an hour. I just need a ride to the next town. She looked harmless enough. Small woman, maybe 54, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that were completely soaked through. No visible weapons, no backpack or bag that could be hiding anything dangerous. Just a scared woman caught in a terrible storm. "Get in," I told her against my better judgment, "but I can only take you as far as the next truck stop." She climbed up into the cab, dripping water everywhere but grateful enough that she was almost crying. "Thank you so much," she said. "I thought I was going to die out there. My name is Linda Kowalski." I told her my name was Maria and handed her a towel from my sleeper berth. She dried off her face and hair, but she was still shivering pretty badly. I cranked up the heat and got back on the road, driving slow and careful through the storm. At first, everything seemed normal. Linda was quiet, just looking out the windshield at the rain and occasionally saying thank you. She seemed genuinely grateful for the ride, and I started to feel good about helping someone in need. The storm was showing no signs of letting up. So I was glad I had not left her out there to fend for herself. But after about 10 minutes, I started to notice some things that made me uncomfortable. First, she kept looking at me instead of looking out the window, not just glancing over occasionally, but staring. Long, intense stares like she was studying my face for some reason. When I would look over at her, she would smile, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. Then she started asking questions, personal questions that seemed inappropriate for someone I had just picked up. How long had I been driving truck? Was I married? Did I have children? Where did I live when I was not on the road? How much money did I make? That last question especially set off alarm bells in my head. Why do you want to know about my finances? I asked her. Her expression changed immediately. The fake gratitude disappeared and was replaced by something cold and calculating. Just making conversation, she said, but her voice had a hard edge to it that had not been there before. I told her I preferred to concentrate on driving in the bad weather, hoping she would take the hint and stop talking. But instead of backing off, she became more aggressive with her questions. She wanted to know what I was hauling, where I was delivering it, what route I normally took. She was asking the kind of questions that only someone planning to rob a truck would ask. By this point, I was getting seriously worried. We were still in the middle of nowhere with at least 20 minutes to go before the next truck stop. The storm was still raging outside, which meant I could not just pull over and tell her to get out. But I also could not shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake in picking her up. That was when she reached into her pocket and pulled out a cell phone. She had told me her car had broken down and she had been walking for over an hour, but the phone looked completely dry. No water damage, no condensation on the screen. If she had been walking in that downpour for an hour, that phone should have been soaked. She made a call speaking quietly, so I could not hear what she was saying, but I caught a few words here and there. Something about got 1 in 20 m out and agricultural equipment. She was talking about me and my load, and I realized with growing horror that this had not been a random breakdown. This was planned. When she hung up, she turned to me with that same cold smile. Change of plans, Maria. I need you to take the next exit and head north toward Quanah. No, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I told you I could only take you to the next truck stop on this highway. That is where you get out. Her smile disappeared completely. I am not asking you, Maria. I'm telling you, take the next exit north or this is going to get very unpleasant for both of us. That was when I saw the knife. She had pulled it out of her other pocket, a folding knife with about a 4-inch blade. She was holding it low next to her leg, but the message was clear. I was no longer giving a stranded hitchhiker a ride. I was being kidnapped. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I was trapped in the cab of my own truck with an armed woman who clearly had accomplices waiting somewhere ahead. The storm outside meant there was no traffic on the road, so no one would see if something happened to me. And even if I could get to my CB radio, who would I call? The nearest town was still miles away. But then I remembered something my trainer had told me years ago. If you ever find yourself in a dangerous situation in your truck, use the size and weight of the vehicle to your advantage. A big rig is a powerful weapon if you know how to use it. The next exit was coming up in about 2 minutes. I could see the green sign through the rain, and I knew that once I took that exit, I would be completely at the mercy of Linda and whoever was waiting for us. I had to do something before then. While we were still on the main highway, I started slowing down gradually like I was preparing to take the exit. Linda relaxed slightly, thinking I was cooperating, but instead of turning onto the exit ramp, I suddenly jerked the steering wheel hard to the right and drove straight off the highway into the grass median. The truck bounced and lurched as we hit the uneven ground, and Linda was thrown against the passenger door. The knife flew out of her hand and clattered to the floor of the cab. I slammed on the brakes and the truck came to a sliding stop in the muddy grass. Before Linda could recover, I had my door open and was jumping down from the cab. The rain hit me like a wall, but I did not care. I ran around to the passenger side and yanked her door open. "Get out!" I shouted over the storm. "Get out of my truck right now." Linda was dazed from being thrown around, but she was still dangerous. She was scrambling around on the floor of the cab, looking for her knife. I did not wait for her to find it. I grabbed her by the arm and physically dragged her out of the truck. She hit the muddy ground hard and started screaming at me, calling me names and threatening to kill me. But without her knife and soaked by the rain, she looked a lot less intimidating than she had inside the cab. I climbed back into my truck and locked the doors. Linda was pounding on the passenger side, still screaming threats, but I ignored her. I put the truck in gear and drove back onto the highway, leaving her standing in the median in the pouring rain. I drove straight to the next truck stop and called the Texas Department of Public Safety. I told them everything that had happened and gave them Linda's description and the approximate location where I had left her. The trooper I spoke with said they would send a unit to look for her, but they warned me that she had probably already been picked up by her accomplices. They also told me something that made my blood run cold. There had been 3 other incidents in the past month involving female hitchhikers who had robbed or carjacked truck drivers in that same area. In one case, the driver had been found beaten unconscious at a truck stop with his load stolen. In another case, the driver had simply disappeared along with his truck. The trooper asked me if I would be willing to look at some photographs to see if I could identify Linda. When I saw her picture in their file, I learned that her real name was Rebecca Thornton, and she had a long criminal record, including armed robbery, assault, and kidnapping. She was part of a crew that specifically targeted truck drivers using the fake breakdown story to get into their cabs. I never found out if they caught Linda that night, and I honestly do not want to know. What matters is that I survived and learned a valuable lesson about trusting strangers on the road. I know it sounds heartless, but I will never pick up another hitchhiker as long as I live. The risk is just too great. Sometimes I still think about that night when I drive through that stretch of Highway 287. I wonder how many other drivers have fallen for the same trick and how many of them were not as lucky as I was. The worst part is knowing that there are probably other crews out there using similar tactics, preying on truckers who are just trying to help someone in trouble. That is what Linda and her crew took from me that night. They did not just threaten my life. They took away my ability to trust people who genuinely need help. I have been driving truck for 12 years, and in that time I have hauled just about everything you can imagine. Furniture, electronics, food products, machinery, you name it. Most of the time you know exactly what you are carrying because you watch them load it or you get detailed paperwork. But sometimes, especially with certain companies, you get what we call a sealed load. The trailer is already loaded and locked when you pick it up, and you are not supposed to open it until you reach your destination. Usually, it is just a security measure to prevent theft or tampering. I had always been fine with sealed loads before, but after what happened to me on Route 2 through northern Michigan 3 years ago, I will never haul another mystery load as long as I live. It was the middle of February, and I was picking up a sealed trailer from a warehouse outside of Flint. The paperwork was pretty vague, just listed the cargo as biological specimens for research purposes. The destination was a laboratory in H-Town, way up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was going to be about a 6-hour drive through some pretty remote forest areas, but the pay was good and I needed the money. The warehouse where I picked up the trailer was strange from the start. It was located way out in an industrial area that seemed mostly abandoned, and the building itself looked more like a bunker than a normal freight facility. There were no windows that I could see, just concrete walls and a few loading docks. The security was intense, too. I had to show my ID at 2 different checkpoints, and they made me sign about 6 different forms before they would even let me see the trailer. The guys who brought the trailer out were wearing full hazmat suits, which immediately made me nervous. I asked the supervisor what kind of biological specimens required that level of protection, but he just told me it was standard procedure and not to worry about it. The trailer was a standard 53 FT refrigerated unit, and they told me to keep it at exactly 38 degrees F during transport. They also gave me a special phone number to call if there were any problems with the refrigeration unit. Before I hooked up to the trailer, I did my standard pre-trip inspection. Everything looked normal from the outside. Good tires, working lights, proper seals on the doors. But when I got close to the back of the trailer, I noticed a smell. It was faint, but it reminded me of the time my grandfather's hunting cabin lost power and all the deer meat in his freezer went bad. A sweet rotten smell that made my stomach turn. I mentioned the smell to the supervisor, but he said that was normal for this type of cargo and that the refrigeration would keep it under control during transport. I was not completely satisfied with that answer, but I had already signed the contracts and I needed the job. So I hooked up the trailer and started the 6-hour drive north. The first few hours went fine. I drove through Saginaw Bay City and then headed northwest on Route 10. The weather was typical for February in Michigan, overcast and cold with patches of snow on the ground. The trailer was tracking well, and the refrigeration unit was maintaining the correct temperature. I had my CB radio on, listening to other drivers complain about road conditions and traffic, and everything seemed normal. It was around 4:00 in the afternoon when I made the turn onto Route 2, heading west toward the Upper Peninsula. This is where the landscape really changes in Michigan. You go from populated areas with farms and small towns to dense forests that stretch for miles without a single building. In the winter, especially late in the day, it can be pretty desolate and spooky. But I had driven this route before, so I was not particularly worried. About an hour after getting on Route 2, just as the sun was starting to set, I heard the first sound. It was coming from the trailer behind me, a kind of thumping noise, like something heavy had shifted and fallen over. This happened sometimes with poorly secured cargo, so I was not immediately alarmed. But then it happened again, and this time it sounded more deliberate, like something was hitting the trailer walls from the inside. I grabbed my CB radio and tried calling the special number they had given me, but I could not get a signal. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees, and cell phone coverage in northern Michigan is pretty spotty anyway. So I decided to pull over at the next rest area and call from a pay phone if I could find one. The thumping from the trailer continued as I drove, and it was getting more frequent and more violent. It sounded like whatever was back there was getting agitated about something. I started to wonder if maybe they were transporting live animals instead of specimens. Maybe lab animals being moved from one research facility to another. That would explain the smell and the noise. And it would also explain why they were being so secretive about the cargo. I found a small rest area about 10 mi down the road. It was just a gravel parking lot with a couple of picnic tables and an outhouse, no pay phone in sight. But I needed to stop and figure out what was going on in that trailer. The thumping had gotten so loud that I was worried something might break loose and damage the refrigeration unit. I parked the truck and trailer at the far end of the rest area, away from the few cars that were there. It was getting dark and the temperature was dropping fast. I grabbed my flashlight and walked back to inspect the trailer. As I got closer, the smell hit me again, much stronger than before. It was not just the sweet rotten smell I had noticed at the warehouse. Now there was something else mixed in, something that smelled like wet dog and ammonia. I walked along the side of the trailer, listening for more sounds from inside. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then, as I reached the back doors, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was not thumping or banging. It was scratching. Long, deliberate scratches like claws dragging across metal. The scratching was coming from multiple locations inside the trailer, and it was getting more frantic. Whatever was in there was not just moving around randomly. It sounded like it was trying to get out. I put my ear against the trailer wall and I could hear other sounds too, a kind of clicking noise and what sounded almost like whimpering or whining. I was starting to get seriously scared. This was not normal cargo behavior, and I was beginning to think that I'd gotten involved in something illegal. Maybe they were smuggling exotic animals or something worse. I decided to call the police as soon as I could find a phone signal. But as I was walking back toward my cab, the scratching suddenly stopped. The trailer went completely silent, and the sudden quiet was somehow even more frightening than the noise had been. I stood there in the growing darkness, listening to nothing but the wind in the trees and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. That was when I noticed the smell was getting stronger, a lot stronger, and it was not just coming from the trailer anymore. It was all around me, like whatever was inside had somehow gotten out. I spun around, shining my flashlight in all directions, but I could not see anything unusual. Just trees, snow, and my truck parked about 50 ft away. I started walking quickly back to my cab, but I'd only gone about 20 ft when I heard a sound behind me that made me break into a run. It was a deep guttural noise somewhere between a growl and a roar. It was not a sound that any animal I knew could make, and it was coming from the direction of my trailer. I reached my truck and jumped into the cab, locking the doors behind me. My hands were shaking as I started the engine and put the truck in gear. I did not even look back at the trailer as I pulled out of the rest area and back onto Route 2. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. For the next hour, I drove as fast as I dared on the dark, winding road. The trailer was completely quiet now. No thumping, no scratching, no sounds at all. But the smell was still there, seeping into the cab, even with all the windows closed and the air circulation turned off. It was getting so bad that I was starting to feel nauseous. I was about 30 mi from H-Town when I had to pull over again. The smell was making me dizzy, and I was afraid I was going to pass out while driving. I found another rest area, this one with better lighting and a few other trucks parked there. I figured I would be safer around other people while I tried to figure out what to do. I parked near the other trucks and got out to check the trailer again. The smell was overwhelming now, and I could see why. There was some kind of dark liquid seeping out from under the trailer doors and pooling on the asphalt. In the light from the rest area lamps, it looked black, but when I shined my flashlight on it, I could see it was actually dark red. That was when I realized I was not hauling biological specimens or lab animals. I was hauling something that had died during transport, and it was decomposing in that trailer. The thought of what might be leaking out made me physically sick. I ran to the bushes and threw up everything in my stomach. When I came back to the truck, there was another driver standing near my trailer. He was an older guy, probably in his 60s, with a concerned look on his face. "You got a problem there, son?" he asked, pointing at the dark liquid on the ground. "That does not look good." I told him I was hauling a sealed load and I did not know what was inside, but something had obviously gone wrong. He took one look at the liquid and shook his head. "Son, I have been driving truck for 40 years and I have seen just about everything, but I have never seen anything leak like that from a legitimate shipment. You need to call the authorities right now." He let me use his satellite phone to call the Michigan State Police. When I explained the situation to the dispatcher, she told me to stay exactly where I was and not to open the trailer under any circumstances. She said they were sending units from both the state police and the Department of Environmental Quality to investigate. The police arrived about 30 minutes later, followed by what looked like a hazmat team. They made me park my truck about 100 yards away while they examined the trailer. I watched through binoculars as they put on full protective gear before approaching the back doors. When they finally opened the trailer, even from 100 yards away, I could see the hazmat team members step back quickly. Whatever was in there was bad enough that even professionals who were prepared for the worst were shocked by it. They spent about 2 hours documenting everything and taking samples before they finally came over to talk to me. The state police detective who interviewed me would not tell me exactly what they had found in the trailer, but he did say that it was not biological specimens for research. He said it appeared to be the remains of multiple large animals that had been illegally slaughtered and were being transported without proper permits or refrigeration. He also said the company that had hired me was under investigation for several other violations. What really bothered me was what he said about the scratches on the inside of the trailer walls. He said they looked fresh, like they had been made during transport. But if the animals were already dead when they loaded the trailer, how could they have made those scratches? When I asked him about this, he just said the investigation was ongoing and he could not discuss the details. I never did find out what was really in that trailer, and I never got paid for the job either. The company disappeared a few weeks after the incident. The detective told me they were probably part of some kind of illegal wildlife trafficking operation. But that does not explain the sounds I heard or the scratches, or why whatever was in there seemed to be trying so desperately to get out. I quit that trucking company the next day and found a job with a firm that only hauls legitimate documented cargo. I will never take another sealed load, no matter how much money they offer me. The nightmares I had for months after that incident were not worth any amount of pay. Sometimes late at night when I'm driving through remote areas, I think about what might have been in that trailer. Were they really dead animals? Or was something still alive when I picked up the load? And if they were alive, What happened to them during those 6 hours on the road? The scratching sounds I heard will haunt me for the rest of my life. And I pray I never find out what was making them. I have been driving truck for 10 years now, and I thought I knew every truck stop, rest area, and fuel station between Atlanta and Savannah. Highway 80 is one of my regular routes, and I have driven it probably 200 times over the years. That is why what happened to me last October still does not make any sense, and it still gives me nightmares when I think about it too hard. I was hauling a load of paper products from a mill outside of Moan down to the port in Savannah. It was a routine run that I had done dozens of times before, usually taking about 4 hours depending on traffic. But this particular day had been a disaster from the start. I had gotten a late start because of problems at the loading dock. Then I ran into construction delays. And then my truck started having electrical problems that kept causing my dashboard lights to flicker on and off. By the time I got to the halfway point of my route, it was almost 11 at night, and I was running dangerously low on fuel. My fuel gauge was showing less than a quarter tank, and I knew I would not make it to Savannah without stopping. The problem was that most of the truck stops along that stretch of highway closed their fuel islands at midnight, and I was cutting it pretty close. I was getting worried about finding an open station when I saw the exit sign. It said Truck Plaza, 24 hours, with an arrow pointing to the right. I had never noticed that exit before, which was strange since I had driven this route so many times, but I was desperate for fuel. So I took the exit and followed the signs down a 2-lane road through some pine woods. The truck stop appeared about 2 mi down the road, and my first thought was relief that I had found somewhere to fuel up. It was a decent-sized place with maybe 20 parking spots and what looked like a full-service restaurant attached to the main building. There were several trucks already parked there, and I could see lights on in the restaurant windows. Everything looked normal and welcoming. I pulled up to the fuel island and shut off my engine. The pumps looked a little older than what I was used to, but they appeared to be working fine. I got out of my cab and walked over to the building to prepare for my fuel, since most places require that after midnight for security reasons. The inside of the building was when I first started to notice that something was off. The decor looked like it had not been updated since maybe the 1970s. Wood-paneled walls, orange carpet, and those old-fashioned cash registers with the big buttons and the mechanical number displays. Behind the counter was a middle-aged woman with a beehive halo and makeup that looked like something from an old movie. "Evening, honey," she said with a smile that seemed genuine enough. "What can I do for you?" I told her I needed to fill up my fuel tanks and asked if I could pay with my company credit card. She looked at the card like she had never seen one before, turning it over in her hands and examining it closely. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but we only take cash," she said. "There is an ATM over by the restaurant if you need to get some money." This struck me as odd since every truck stop in America takes credit cards, especially company fuel cards, but I needed the fuel. So I walked over to the ATM. It was one of those old machines with a tiny green screen and buttons that looked like they had been installed sometime in the 1980s. When I put my card in, it made strange beeping noises, but eventually dispensed the cash I needed. I paid for the fuel and went back out to pump it into my tanks. While I was filling up, I looked around at the other trucks parked there. That was when I noticed something else strange. All of the trucks looked old. Not just well-maintained older models, but actually old, like trucks from the 1970s and 1980s that you would normally only see at truck shows or in museums. One of them was a 1979 Peterbilt with the old-style cab and chrome exhaust stacks. Another was a Kenworth from the early 1980s with the kind of paint job you never see anymore. All of the trucks had CB antennas and accessories that looked like they came from decades ago. It was like walking into a truck stop from 40 years in the past. I finished fueling and decided to go into the restaurant for a cup of coffee before getting back on the road. The inside of the restaurant was even more like a time capsule than the main building. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner playing songs from the 1970s, and waitresses wearing uniforms with little white aprons. The menu was handwritten on a chalkboard and the prices were ridiculously low. Coffee was $50, hamburgers were $2, and pie was $1, $50. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee from a waitress who looked to be in her 30s, but was wearing her hair and makeup in a style from decades ago. As I looked around the restaurant, I realized that all of the other customers looked the same way. Men wearing trucker caps and shirts with logos from companies that I was pretty sure had gone out of business years ago. Women with big hair and clothes that looked like they came from a different era. The conversation I was hearing from the other customers was strange, too. They were talking about fuel prices that made no sense, complaining about paying 80 cents a gallon when I had just paid over $3. They were discussing CB radio channels and trucking regulations that I had never heard of. One man was talking about a load he was hauling to a company that I knew for certain had been bought out and renamed in the 1990s. I started to feel seriously uncomfortable, like I had accidentally walked into some kind of historical reenactment or theme restaurant. But everyone was acting completely normal, like there was nothing unusual about the situation at all. When I tried to pay for my coffee with modern bills, the waitress looked at them strangely and asked if I had anything smaller. I left a $5 bill on the counter, which seemed to satisfy her, and headed for the door. As I was leaving, I heard one of the truck drivers at a booth say something that made my skin crawl. "That new girl sure is dressed funny," he said to his companion. "Look at them clothes she's wearing, and that truck of hers, I have never seen anything like it." They were talking about me. My truck is a 2019 Freightliner, which is modern but not unusual by any means. And my clothes were just jeans and a company shirt. Nothing that should have attracted attention, but apparently in this place, I was the one who looked out of place. I walked quickly back to my truck, wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. But as I was doing my pre-trip inspection before leaving, one of the other drivers approached me. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, wearing a flannel shirt and a trucker cap with a patch from a company I did not recognize. "That is a real nice rig you got there," he said, walking around my truck and examining it closely. "What year is that Freightliner? I've never seen one with all them fancy electronics and such." I told him it was a 2019 model and he looked at me like I was crazy. "2019, he said, laughing. "Come on now, girl, quit pulling my leg. It is only 1983. They do not make trucks like this yet." My heart started pounding as I realized what he was saying. According to this man, it was 1983. But I knew for certain that it was October 2023 when I had stopped at this truck stop. I looked at his truck again, a 1970s Peterbilt that looked brand new, and suddenly everything started to make sense in the most terrifying way possible. Somehow, I had stumbled into a truck stop that existed in the wrong time. Either I had gone back in time, or this place was stuck in the past, or something even stranger was happening that I could not begin to understand. I told the man I had to get going and climbed into my cab as quickly as I could. My hands were shaking as I started the engine and put the truck in gear. I drove out of that truck stop parking lot faster than I had ever driven with a full load, desperate to get back to the main highway and away from whatever I had just experienced. The drive back to Highway 80 felt like it took forever, even though it was only about 2 mi. When I finally reached the on-ramp and got back onto the interstate, I felt like I could breathe again. Everything looked normal. Modern trucks, normal traffic, contemporary billboards and signs. I was back in 2023 where I belonged. I drove straight through to Savannah without stopping, delivered my load, and immediately called my dispatcher to tell him what had happened. He thought I was either joking or having some kind of breakdown from exhaustion. When I insisted that I was serious, he told me to get some sleep and that we would talk about it when I got back to the terminal. The next morning, I called the Georgia Department of Transportation to ask about truck stops along Highway 80. I described the location where I had stopped, but they told me there was no truck stop at that exit. According to their records, there was nothing but woods and private property in that area. I drove back to the same spot the next week. Determined to prove to myself that I had not imagined the whole thing, I found the exit sign and took the same route down the 2-lane road through the pine woods. But when I got to where the truck stop should have been, there was nothing there. Just trees and an empty field. No building, no fuel pumps, no parking lot, nothing. I asked other drivers who regularly run Highway 80 if they had ever seen a truck stop at that location. Most of them said no. But one older driver told me something that gave me chills. He said that back in the 1980s, there used to be a truck stop in that area called Pinewoods Plaza that was popular with drivers, but it had burned down in 1984 and was never rebuilt. According to him, Several drivers had died in that fire, including some who were sleeping in their cabs in the parking lot when the restaurant caught fire and spread to the fuel pumps. He said it was one of the worst truck stop disasters in Georgia history, and that the area had been considered cursed ever since. I have never found any official records of this fire, and I have never been able to find anyone who can confirm that story, but I also have never been able to explain what happened to me that night. I know what I saw, what I experienced, and what I heard those people say. I was in a truck stop from 1983, surrounded by drivers and trucks from 40 years ago. Since that night, I have changed my route between Moan and Savannah. I take Highway 16 instead of Highway 80, even though it adds almost an hour to my drive time. I cannot bring myself to pass that exit again, and I refuse to drive that stretch of road after dark. Other drivers think I am crazy, and maybe I am. But I know what I experienced, and I know it was real. Sometimes late at night when I'm driving through rural areas, I wonder if there are other places like that truck stop out there. Places where time does not work the way it should, where the past and present get mixed up in ways that we cannot understand. I just hope I never find another one. I've been a long-haul trucker for 14 years, and in all that time, I have heard just about every kind of conversation you can imagine come over the CB radio. Drivers complaining about traffic, sharing information about speed traps, warning each other about bad weather ahead, and sometimes just talking to pass the time during those long, lonely hours on the road. The CB radio is our lifeline out there, connecting us to other drivers when we are hundreds of miles from home. But what happened to me on Interstate 94 through North Dakota 2 years ago made me realize that sometimes the voice on the other end of that radio is not someone you want to be connected to. I was hauling a load of farm equipment from Bismarck to Minneapolis, a run that takes you through some of the most desolate country in America. Interstate 94 through North Dakota is basically a straight line through endless fields of wheat and corn with maybe a farmhouse or grain elevator visible every 10 or 15 miles. During harvest season in September, you might see some activity in the fields, but this was late November, and everything was dead and brown under a gray sky that looked like it was going to snow any minute. I had been on the road since early morning, and by the time I reached the halfway point near Jamestown, it was getting dark. The weather was getting worse too, with a cold wind that was rocking my trailer and the first few snowflakes starting to hit my windshield. I was listening to Channel 19 on my CB, hoping to hear from other drivers about road conditions ahead when I heard a voice that made me immediately uncomfortable. Well, the voice said, and I could hear the sneer in it, even over the static. Look what we got here, Montana Rick rolling eastbound in that pretty blue Peterbilt. How you doing tonight, Rick? The voice knew my name and the color of my truck, which meant whoever was talking could see me. I looked in my mirrors and checked the traffic around me, but I only saw a few cars and one other truck about a half-mile behind me. I grabbed my CB microphone and responded, "This is Montana Rick. Who am I talking to?" There was a pause, then a laugh that sent chills down my spine. "You do not need to know who I am, Rick, but I know all about you. I know you are hauling John Deere equipment to Minneapolis. I know you live in Billings with your wife, Sandra, and your 2 kids. I know you drive the same route about twice a month. I have been watching you for a while now." My heart started pounding. This was not normal CB chatter. This was someone who had been studying me, learning my routines, gathering information about my family. I tried to keep my voice steady when I responded. "I think you have got me confused with someone else, friend. I do not know what you are talking about." The laugh came again, nastier this time. "Oh, I got the right guy, Rick. I know exactly who you are and I know exactly where you are right now. Hurry. Marker 258 eastbound on user 94. You just passed that grain elevator about 3 mi back. Your truck is looking a little dirty, Rick. When was the last time you washed it?" I looked at my odometer and felt my blood turn cold. He was exactly right about my location, and my truck was dirty from driving through construction zones earlier in the day. Whoever this was, he was definitely watching me right now. I grabbed my CB again. "Look, I do not know who you are or what you want, but you need to stop this right now. You are making me uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. The voice was mocking now. You have not seen uncomfortable yet, Rick. I'm just getting started. You see, I have been following truckers like you for months now, learning about them, studying their habits, figuring out the best ways to get to them. And you, Rick, you have become my favorite. I was looking frantically in my mirrors now, trying to figure out which vehicle this lunatic was in. The truck behind me was too far back to see my license plate or read my company name, but there were a couple of cars that could be following me. The problem was that on a straight highway like I-94, anyone could be watching me with binoculars from a mile away. "What do you want from me?" I asked into the CB. "I want you to be afraid, Rick. I want you to know that someone is watching you, someone who knows where you live and where your family lives. I want you to understand that you are not safe out there on that highway, and neither are Sandra and the kids back home in Billings." The mention of my wife and children by name made me see red. This psychopath was threatening my family. I grabbed the CB microphone so hard my knuckles turned white. "You stay away from my family, you sick freak. I am calling the police right now." "Go ahead and call them, Rick. Tell them some voice on the CB radio is scaring you. See how seriously they take it. Besides, what are they going to do? I could be in any one of these vehicles around you, or I could be 10 mi away with a good radio setup. You will never find me." He was right, and we both knew it. The CB radio has a range of several miles under good conditions, and someone with a powerful base station or a mobile setup could be anywhere in a fairly large area. Even if the police took my complaint seriously, they would have no way to track down someone using a CB radio. But I tried anyway. I called 911 on my cell phone and explained the situation to the North Dakota State Patrol dispatcher. She was sympathetic, but told me exactly what I expected to hear. Without a license plate number or a specific description of the vehicle the person was in, there was nothing they could do. She suggested I change to a different CB channel and avoid using my handle or giving out any personal information. I switched to Channel 17, but within 5 minutes the voice was back. "Channel 17. Now, Rick, you think that's going to help? I told you I have been studying. I know all your habits. You always switch to 17 when 19 gets too crowded. You're so predictable." This was getting worse by the minute. Not only was this person following me tonight, but he had apparently been monitoring my CB conversations for weeks or months. He knew my patterns, my routes, my family information, probably everything about my life. I tried switching to Channel 21, then 12, then 6. Each time within a few minutes, the voice would find me again. He was scanning the channels, listening for my voice, and he seemed to have all the time in the world to devote to tormenting me. "You cannot hide from me, Rick," he said when he found me on Channel 6. "I know every frequency you use. I've been recording your conversations for months. I know about that load of electronics you hauled to Denver last month. I know about the speeding ticket you got in Wyoming. I know about that truck stop waitress in Iowa that you have been flirting with." That last comment hit me like a punch in the gut because it was true. There was a waitress at a Flying J in Iowa that I'd been friendly with on my runs through there. Maybe a little too friendly for a married man. It was nothing serious, just harmless flirting, but it was something I was ashamed of and definitely something I had never told anyone about. The fact that this stalker knew about it meant he had been watching me much more closely than I had realized. "You're starting to understand now, are not you, Rick?" The voice continued. "I know everything about you, your routes, your schedule, your habits, your secrets, and now I am going to start using that information. What do you want from me?" I asked again, but this time my voice was shaking. "I want you to suffer, Rick. I want you to be afraid every time you get in that truck. I want you to wonder if tonight is the night I decide to pay a visit to Sandra and the kids. I want you to know that someone out there hates you enough to destroy your life." "Why?" I asked. "What did I do to you?" There was a long pause, and when the voice came back, it was different. Quieter, more personal, filled with rage. "You killed my brother." I felt like I had been hit by lightning. "I never killed anyone. You have got the wrong person. Route 2 in Montana 18 months ago. You were westbound. My brother was eastbound on his motorcycle. You crossed the center line to avoid a deer and hit him head-on. Remember now, Rick?" The accident came flooding back to me. It had been during a bad storm with heavy rain and poor visibility. A deer had jumped out in front of my truck, and I had swerved to avoid it. I remembered feeling the impact and stopping to check. But when I got out, there was no deer and no damage to my truck. I thought I had missed it, and the sound had just been my imagination. I had never seen a motorcycle, never seen another vehicle at all. I never saw a motorcycle, I said into the CB. I never knew I hit anyone. Of course, you did not stop, the voice snarled. You just kept driving. Left my brother dying on the side of the road in the rain. It took the police 3 hours to find him, and by then it was too late. But they found paint chips from your truck on his bike and tire tracks that matched your rig. They had your license number, Rick. My hands were shaking now. I remembered the police coming to my house a few weeks after the accident, asking questions about my whereabouts on that date. I had told them the truth about being in the area, but I honestly had not known about any collision. The investigation had eventually been dropped due to lack of evidence, and I had assumed it was over. I swear to you, I never knew I hit anyone, I said. I thought I missed the deer. It was dark and raining and I could not see anything. If I had known someone was hurt, I would have stopped. You are a liar, Rick. You killed my brother and drove away. Now I'm going to make you pay. The conversation continued for the next 2 hours as I drove through the darkness toward Minneapolis. The voice would disappear for a while, then come back on a different channel with more threats, more details about my life, more promises of what he was going to do to me and my family. He knew the names of my children's schools, the address of my house, the make and model of my wife's car. He had been preparing for this for months. As I got closer to Minneapolis, I started to hope that the distance would break up the radio contact and I would lose him. But when I reached the truck stop where I was planning to spend the night, he was still there pulling into the TA on Highway 10. Rick, same place you always stop when you come to Minneapolis. Room 237 at the motel next door, right? Same room you had last time you were here. He was right again. I had a standing reservation at that motel and I always requested the same room. This person had been tracking not just my driving routes, but my accommodation patterns as well. I parked my truck and called the police again, this time from the truck stop office. The Minneapolis police took the threat more seriously than the North Dakota State Patrol had, especially when I told them about the connection to the motorcycle accident. They sent 2 officers to the truck stop to take a report and suggested I stay somewhere else for the night. But even at a different motel with the CB radio turned off, I could not escape the feeling that I was being watched. Every car that passed by the motel seemed suspicious. Every person I saw in the lobby or the parking lot could have been my stalker. I did not sleep at all that night. The harassment continued for the next 6 months. The voice would find me on the CB radio 2 or 3 times a week, always with new threats, always with new details about my life that he had somehow learned. He started calling my house, hanging up when my wife answered. He started following my wife and kids, describing what they were wearing when they left for school or work. He mailed photographs to my house, showing my family at the grocery store, at the gas station, at the kids' baseball games. The police in multiple states got involved, but they could never catch him. He was too careful, never staying on the radio long enough to triangulate his position, never using the same phone twice, always staying just out of reach. The final confrontation happened 6 months after that first night on I-94. I was hauling a load through western Minnesota when the voice came over the CB one last time. Tonight is the night, Rick. I'm done playing games tonight. You pay for what you did to my brother. This time I was ready for him. I'd been working with the FBI for months, and they had equipped my truck with tracking equipment and given me a special radio that could record conversations and help pinpoint locations. When the voice came over the CB, I activated the tracking system and started asking questions to keep him talking. It worked. The FBI was able to trace a signal to a location about 15 mi from where I was driving. State police converged on the area and arrested a man named Robert Kowalski, who had been following me in a pickup truck equipped with a powerful CB radio and other surveillance equipment. When they searched his truck and his house, they found months' worth of photographs, recordings, and written notes about my daily activities. He had been stalking not just me, but several other truck drivers who he blamed for various accidents and incidents. The police said it was one of the most thorough stalking cases they had ever seen. During the trial, I learned more about the motorcycle accident that had started the whole nightmare. Robert's brother had indeed been killed in a collision with a truck during a storm, but the investigation had never definitively proven that I was the driver involved. Robert had become obsessed with the idea that I was responsible and had spent over a year planning his revenge. He was convicted of stalking, harassment, and making terroristic threats, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But the damage was already done. I could not continue driving the same routes knowing that he or someone like him might be out there watching me. I could not use my CB radio without wondering if the voice on the other end was friendly or hostile. Most importantly, I could not stop thinking about that rainy night 18 months before, and whether I really had been responsible for someone's death. I left long-haul trucking 6 months after the trial, and took a local job driving for a construction company. I miss the open road sometimes, but I do not miss the fear that someone might be watching me, following me, learning everything about my life so they can use it against me. The worst part is knowing that there are probably other Robert Kowalskis out there, nursing grudges against drivers for real or imagined wrongs, planning their own campaigns of terror and revenge. The CB radio that used to connect us to other drivers and make us feel less alone on the highway had become a weapon that someone could use to reach into our lives and destroy them. That is the real horror of what happened to me. It was not just the threats or the stalking. It was the realization that the very technology that makes trucking bearable can also make it terrifying. I have been driving truck for 11 years, and I thought I had seen every type of warehouse, loading dock and industrial facility in the country, from massive distribution centers for major retailers to small family operations run out of converted barns. I've picked up and delivered loads at just about every kind of place you can imagine. But what I experienced at an industrial facility outside of Bakersfield 3 years ago still haunts my dreams and made me realize that some cargo should never be transported by anyone. It was late October, and I had just finished delivering a load of agricultural equipment to a farm near Fresno. My dispatcher called me while I was still at the delivery site and offered me a pickup that same evening. The pay was excellent, almost double what I would normally make for a similar run. And since I needed the money for my daughter's college tuition, I agreed to take it, even though it meant driving through the night. The pickup location was listed as Kern Valley Industrial Storage, with an address about 30 mi southeast of Bakersfield. I had never heard of the company before, but that was not unusual since new warehouses and distribution centers open all the time in California. The paperwork showed I would be hauling processed agricultural products to a facility in Phoenix, which seemed routine enough. I arrived at the address around 11 at night, expecting to find a typical industrial complex with loading docks and plenty of lighting. Instead, I found myself driving down a narrow dirt road that led to an isolated warehouse surrounded by empty fields. The building was old and run down with rust stains on the metal siding and weeds growing up through cracks in the parking lot. There were no company signs visible anywhere, just a small placard next to the entrance that said KVI Storage. The only vehicles in the parking lot were 2 pickup trucks and a large refrigerated truck that looked like it had been there for a while. The loading dock was dimly lit by a single floodlight, and I could see several men moving around in the shadows. Something about the whole setup made me uncomfortable. But I had driven a long way to get there, and I needed the money, so I backed my trailer up to the dock and went to find whoever was in charge. The men working the loading dock were not like the typical warehouse workers I was used to dealing with. They were all wearing dark clothes and heavy work gloves, even though it was a warm night. None of them made eye contact with me. And when I asked who I should check in with, they just pointed toward a small office attached to the side of the warehouse. The office was even stranger than the loading area. It was furnished with old metal desks and filing cabinets that looked like they came from the 1970s, and the walls were covered with charts and diagrams that I could not make sense of. Behind the main desk sat a thin, nervous-looking man in his 50s who introduced himself as Mr. Patterson. He had me sign several documents, but when I tried to read them carefully, he kept rushing me and saying they needed to get the load finished before morning. What exactly am I hauling? I asked him since the paperwork was still vague about the specific contents. Processed meat products, he said without looking up from his clipboard. Specialty items for restaurants in Phoenix, nothing you need to worry about. I asked to see the load before they sealed the trailer, which is standard practice for most drivers, but Mr. Patterson said that would not be possible due to health department regulations. He assured me that everything was properly packaged and temperature controlled, and that I just needed to maintain the refrigeration at 35 degrees during transport. While we were talking, I heard sounds coming from the warehouse that did not seem right for a meat processing operation. There was a lot of mechanical noise, like heavy machinery running, but also other sounds that I could not identify. Scraping noises, thumping, and what sounded almost like voices or crying. When I asked Mr. Patterson about the noise, he said they were working on multiple orders and the equipment could be loud at night. The loading process took about 2 hours, which seemed excessive for a single trailer load. I waited in the office while the workers filled my trailer. And during that time, I noticed several things that made me increasingly uneasy. First, there was a strong chemical smell throughout the building, like bleach mixed with something organic and unpleasant. Second, the workers kept going in and out of a section of the warehouse that was blocked off by heavy plastic sheeting, and I could hear different machinery running back there. Most disturbing were the phone calls that Mr. Patterson received while I was waiting. He would answer in a quiet voice and have brief conversations using terms I did not understand. I heard him say things like, "Processing complete on batch 7, disposal truck arrives at 3, and sanitization of area 4 needed before morning." These did not sound like normal business conversations for a food processing facility. Around 1:00 in the morning, the workers finished loading my trailer and Mr. Patterson had me sign the final paperwork. As I was walking back to my truck, I passed close to the plastic sheeting that blocked off the restricted area of the warehouse. Through a gap in the plastic, I could see into the room beyond, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There were several large metal tables under bright lights, and on those tables were what looked like body parts. Not animal parts like you would expect in a meat processing plant, but human limbs and torsos. There were people in surgical scrubs working over the tables, and I could see various medical instruments and containers filled with organs. I realized with growing horror that I was looking at some kind of illegal organ harvesting operation. I tried to act normal as I walked back to my truck, but my hands were shaking as I started the engine. The workers sealed my trailer and gave me the documentation for the load, and I drove away from that warehouse as quickly as I could without appearing suspicious. But as soon as I was out of sight of the facility, I pulled over and called 911. The Kern County Sheriff's Department dispatcher took my report seriously when I described what I had seen, but she told me that I needed to continue with my delivery as planned so as not to alert the people at the warehouse that they had been discovered. She said detectives would meet me at a truck stop outside of Barstow to examine the cargo and coordinate with law enforcement in Arizona. The next 4 hours were the longest of my life. I drove through the night knowing that my trailer was loaded with evidence of human butchery and probably with actual human remains. The refrigeration unit kept the trailer at the required temperature, but I found myself wondering what exactly I was keeping cold back there. Every time I looked in my mirrors and saw that trailer behind me, I felt sick to my stomach. The detectives met me at the truck stop as promised, along with a team from the coroner's office and several FBI agents. When they opened my trailer, even these experienced law enforcement professionals were visibly shaken by what they found. The trailer was loaded with coolers and containers, and inside those containers were human organs, tissue samples, and body parts that had been harvested and packaged for transport. According to the FBI agent who interviewed me, what I had stumbled into was part of a large-scale illegal organ trafficking network. The warehouse in Bakersfield was one of several facilities where they were harvesting organs from victims, processing them for transport, and shipping them to buyers around the country. My truck was being used to transport harvested organs to a medical facility in Phoenix that was part of the same criminal network. The investigation that followed my report led to the arrest of over 20 people in California, Arizona, and Nevada. The facility where I had picked up the load was raided the next day, and investigators found evidence of dozens of victims who had been murdered for their organs. Many of the victims were homeless people, undocumented immigrants, and other vulnerable individuals who would not be missed if they disappeared. What haunted me most was learning that this was not the first time they had used my trucking company to transport their cargo. According to the FBI, they had been hiring independent drivers for months to transport their processed meat products, and I was just the first driver who happened to see something I should not have seen. They told me that other drivers had probably transported similar loads without ever knowing what they were really carrying. The psychological impact of that night has never left me. For months afterward, I would wake up in cold sweats thinking about those metal tables and the people in surgical scrubs. I kept wondering about the victims whose remains I had transported and whether their families would ever know what had happened to them. I felt complicit in their murders, even though I had not known what I was carrying. I took a leave of absence from trucking for 6 months after the trial, during which several of the defendants were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. When I finally went back to work, I changed companies and now only haul loads for customers that I know personally. I refuse to take any pickup that involves refrigerated cargo, processed food products, or facilities that I am not familiar with. The worst part is knowing that there are probably other operations like this one still running using legitimate truckers to transport their illegal cargo. Every time I see a driver picking up a sealed load from an unfamiliar warehouse, I wonder if they know what they are really hauling. The criminal organizations that run these operations are sophisticated enough to make everything look legitimate. And most drivers would never have any reason to suspect what is really in their trailer. I still have nightmares about that warehouse in Bakersfield. I dream about the plastic sheeting, the metal tables, and the sound of machinery running in the middle of the night. But mostly, I dream about the victims, the people who died so that someone could harvest their organs and sell them for profit. I carry the weight of their memory with me every time I get behind the wheel of a truck. The FBI agent who handled the case told me that my report saved lives by shutting down the network before they could claim more victims. He said I should be proud of doing the right thing even though it put me in danger. But it's hard to feel proud when you know that you were an unwitting participant in something so evil. This experience taught me that there are horrors in this world that most people never see, and that evil can hide behind the facade of legitimate business. It taught me that as truck drivers, we have a responsibility to pay attention to what we are hauling and where we are picking it up. Most importantly, it taught me that if something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. And it is better to walk away from a job than to become part of something that will haunt you for the rest of your life. I will never forget the faces of those workers at the loading dock, or the smell of that warehouse, or the sight of what was on those metal tables. But I will also never forget that sometimes one person's willingness to speak up can stop something terrible from continuing. The victims of that organ trafficking network deserve justice, and I'm glad that I was able to help them get it. Even though the cost to my own peace of mind has been enormous, the road can be a dangerous place for truck drivers, but the real danger is not always other vehicles or bad weather. Sometimes the real danger is the cargo we agree to haul and the people who hire us to haul it. I have been driving truck through the Appalachian Mountains for 9 years, and I thought I knew every road, every mountain pass, and every shortcut in West Virginia. The mountains can be tricky to navigate, especially in bad weather, but they hold a beauty that keeps me coming back to these routes year after year. But what happened to me on a foggy night in November 2 years ago showed me that there are roads in these mountains that do not appear on any map in places that exist in ways that defy all logic and reason. I was hauling a load of furniture from a factory in Martinsburg to a distribution center in Charleston, a route I had driven probably 50 times before. It was a routine run that normally takes about 3 hours following Interstate 81 south to Interstate 64 west through the heart of the mountain region. But that night, everything went wrong from the moment I left the loading dock. First, there was an accident on I-81 that had traffic backed up for miles. Then, construction on Interstate 64 forced all trucks onto a detour that added another hour to the trip. By the time I was getting close to Charleston, it was almost midnight and I was running way behind schedule. To make matters worse, a thick fog had rolled and that reduced visibility to maybe 20 ft in front of my headlights. I was following my GPS navigation system through the detour route when it suddenly announced that I should take the next right turn to stay on the fastest route to my destination. The turn was onto a road that I had never noticed before, even though I had driven this area many times. It was a narrow 2-lane mountain road with no street signs or route markers visible in the fog. Something about the road felt wrong from the moment I made the turn. The pavement was older than what you would expect on a state highway, with deep cracks and potholes that suggested it had not been maintained in years. There were no guardrails along the edges, even though we were clearly climbing up into the mountains where the drop-offs could be dangerous. Most unsettling of all, there were no other vehicles on the road, which was unusual even for a back road at midnight. The fog seemed to get thicker as I climbed higher into the mountains until I could barely see the edge of the pavement in my headlights. My GPS was still showing that I was on the correct route, but the estimated time to my destination kept changing randomly. First, it said 30 minutes, then an hour and 15 minutes, then 45 minutes. The system seemed as confused as I was about where this road was actually leading. After driving for about 20 minutes on this mysterious road, I started to see lights ahead through the fog. At first, I thought it might be other traffic, but as I got closer, I realized the lights were stationary. They were coming from buildings, and as I crested a small hill, I found myself looking down at what appeared to be a small mountain town nestled in a valley. The town was unlike anything I had ever seen in West Virginia. The buildings looked old, like something from the early 1900s, with wooden storefronts and houses that seemed to be lit by gas lamps rather than electric lights. There were people moving around on the streets, even though it was well past midnight, and I could see horse-drawn wagons parked alongside what looked like very old automobiles. My first thought was that I had somehow stumbled onto the set of a historical movie or some kind of living history museum. But as I drove down the main street, I realized that this was no movie set. The people I was seeing were going about their normal business, entering and leaving shops, talking to each other on street corners, and paying no attention to my modern truck as it rumbled through their town. I stopped at what appeared to be a gas station, hoping to ask for directions and figure out where I was. The building looked like something from the 1920s with old-fashioned gas pumps and a sign that advertised gasoline for 12 cents a gallon. A man in overalls and a cloth cap came out to greet me, and when he spoke, his accent was unlike any I had heard in modern West Virginia. "Evening, stranger," he said, looking up at my cab with curiosity. "That is quite a machine you've got there. What kind of engine does it run on?" I told him it was a diesel truck, but he looked at me with complete confusion, like he had never heard the word diesel before. When I asked him what town this was and how I could get back to Interstate 64, he scratched his head and said he had never heard of any Interstate 64. "This here is Millbrook," he said. "Been here all my life and there is not no interstate road anywhere around these parts. You must be lost, son." I asked him what year it was and his expression changed from confused to concerned. "Why, it is 1923, of course. Are you feeling all right, mister? You look a bit peaked." My heart started pounding as I realized what was happening. Somehow, I had driven my 2020 Kenworth into a town that existed in 1923. I looked around at the people on the street, and they were all dressed in clothes from that era. The cars I had seen were Model T Fords and other vehicles from the early 20th century. The architecture, the street lamps, even the smell of the air was from a different time period. I thanked the man and got back in my truck as quickly as I could. I needed to get out of this place and back to the real world. But as I tried to drive back up the hill the way I had come, I discovered that the road was blocked. There were people standing across the street and they did not look friendly. They were pointing at my truck and talking among themselves in voices too low for me to hear. One of them, an older man in a black suit and hat, approached my driver's side window. When I rolled it down, he looked at me with eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You do not belong here," he said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "This is not your time and this is not your place. But now that you are here, you cannot leave." "What do you mean I cannot leave?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The road only goes one way for people like you," he said. "You can go deeper into our world, but you cannot go back to yours. That is the price of traveling on roads that do not exist in your time." I looked in my mirrors and saw that more people had gathered behind my truck. They were not threatening me directly, but they were clearly blocking any escape route. I was trapped in a town from 1923 with no way to get back to my own time. The old man in the black suit tapped on my window again. "There is a way out," he said, "but you have to follow the rules. You have to become one of us. Give up your old life and stay here forever. Or you can try to find the other road, the one that leads out of our time. But most people who try that road are never seen again." I asked him about the other road, and he pointed toward the far end of town, where the street disappeared into the fog and darkness. "That way leads to places that are worse than here." He said places where time does not work at all, where people get lost between the years and wander forever. But it is your choice. I knew I could not stay in 1923, no matter how real this place seemed. I had a family in 2022, a job, a life that I needed to get back to. So I thanked the old man, put my truck in gear, and drove toward the far end of town, toward the road he had warned me about. The people of Millbrook watched me go, but they did not try to stop me. As I reached the edge of town, I looked back and saw them all standing in the street, looking sad and disappointed, like they had hoped I would choose to stay with them. The road out of town was even stranger than the road that had brought me there. It seemed to twist and turn in ways that made no sense, sometimes climbing steeply uphill and sometimes dropping so sharply that I worried my brakes would not hold. The fog was so thick that I could not see anything beyond my headlights, and my GPS had stopped working entirely. I drove for what felt like hours, though my clock seemed to be moving randomly. Sometimes it would jump forward by 30 minutes, sometimes it would go backward. I passed through other small communities that looked like they were from different time periods. One looked like a frontier town from the 1800s with wooden sidewalks and hitching posts. Another looked more modern, but the cars were all from the 1950s. In each place, people would come out to look at my truck and wave at me, but I did not stop. I was afraid that if I stopped again, I would become trapped in another time period and never find my way home. Finally, after driving through the night in this nightmare landscape of displaced time and impossible geography, I saw something that gave me hope. There were modern road signs ahead, and the pavement looked new and well-maintained. As I came around a curve, I saw the familiar green signs of Interstate 64, and I knew I was back in the real world. I pulled over at the first truck stop I found and called my dispatcher to let him know I was all right. I had been missing for over 12 hours, and the GPS tracking system on my truck had shown me as being in an area where there were no roads. Search and rescue teams had been looking for me, thinking I had driven off a cliff or gotten stuck in a remote area. I tried to explain what had happened, but nobody believed me. They thought the stress of driving in heavy fog had caused me to hallucinate or have some kind of mental breakdown. The company sent me to a doctor who found nothing wrong with me physically, but recommended that I take some time off to recover from whatever I had experienced. I never found any record of a town called Millbrook in West Virginia, nor any explanation for how I had been missing for 12 hours while driving on roads that supposedly did not exist. The GPS route that had led me to that first mountain road was no longer in the system, and when I tried to retrace my path a few weeks later, I could not find the turnoff that had started the whole nightmare. But I know what I experienced was real. I know there are roads in these mountains that connect to places and times that should not exist. I know there are communities of people living in the past, trapped in their own time periods, hoping that travelers like me will choose to stay with them. Since that night, I have been much more careful about which routes I take through the mountains. I stick to the main highways and avoid any detours or shortcuts that my GPS might suggest. I keep paper maps in my truck as backup, and I never drive alone through remote areas at night. Other drivers have told me similar stories about getting lost on roads that do not appear on maps or finding themselves in places that seem to exist outside of normal time. Most people dismiss these stories as folklore or the result of fatigue and isolation. But I know better. I know that there are mysteries in these mountains that we do not understand and roads that lead to destinations that should not be possible. The most frightening part is not knowing how many other drivers have taken those roads and never found their way back. How many truckers have disappeared in these mountains, officially listed as missing persons, but actually trapped in some other time or place. How many are still driving those impossible roads, looking for a way home that may not exist? I still drive through West Virginia because it is my job and my livelihood. But every time I see fog rolling in over the mountains, every time my GPS suggests an unfamiliar route, I remember that old man in the black suit and his warning about roads that only go one way. I remember the choice he offered me. And I wonder what would have happened if I had chosen to stay in Millbrook in 1923 forever. Sometimes late at night when I'm driving through the mountains, I think I can see lights in the distance that do not belong to any town that exists on modern maps. And I wonder if somewhere out there in a place that exists between yesterday and today, The people of Millbrook are still waiting for another lost traveler to find their way home. I've been driving truck for 7 years now, and in all that time, I have never questioned the legitimacy of an official Department of Transportation weigh station. When you see those signs that say all trucks must stop, you stop. When due officers tell you to pull over for an inspection, you comply. It is part of the job. And even though it can be inconvenient and sometimes costly if they find violations, you respect the authority because these inspections keep dangerous trucks off the road. But what happened to me at a remote weigh station on Highway 97 in Oregon last year showed me that not everyone wearing a DOT uniform has the authority they claim to have, and that some inspections are not about truck safety at all. I was hauling a load of lumber from a mill outside of Bend to a construction company in Sacramento, a route that takes you through some of the most remote and beautiful country in the Pacific Northwest. Highway 97 runs north and south through central Oregon, and there are long stretches where you might not see another vehicle for 20 or 30 minutes. The landscape is high desert with juniper trees and sage brush stretching for miles in every direction. It is the kind of place where you can really appreciate the isolation and freedom of the trucking life. It was around 9 at night in early December, and I had been driving since noon. The weather was clear and cold, with a new moon that made the desert darkness almost complete except for my headlights. I was maybe 40 mi south of Bend when I saw the signs for a mandatory weigh station ahead. I had driven this route probably 20 times before, but I could not remember ever seeing a weigh station at this location. Usually, the due stations are located closer to major cities or at state borders, not in the middle of nowhere. But the signs looked official with the standard due logos and the familiar all commercial vehicles must stop language. As I got closer, I could see the weigh station building and the scale platforms lit up by floodlights. There were a couple of other trucks already there, and I could see people in what looked like due uniforms moving around the facility. Everything appeared normal and legitimate. I pulled onto the scale and waited for the signal to proceed to the inspection area. A man wearing a due jacket and carrying a clipboard approached my truck. He looked professional enough with the standard uniform and equipment that I was used to seeing at weigh stations. He told me to park in Bay 3 and bring my logbook and vehicle registration to the office for inspection. The office was a temporary-looking building, more like a construction trailer than the permanent facilities you usually see at weigh stations. Inside, there were several men wearing due uniforms, but something about them seemed off. They were not as professional as real DOT officers usually are, and they seemed more interested in asking questions about my cargo and my route than about my driving hours or vehicle maintenance records. "What exactly are you hauling?" one of them asked. Even though my bill of lading clearly showed lumber products, I told him it was construction lumber, and he asked where I had loaded it and where I was delivering it. These were unusual questions for a DOT inspection, which typically focuses on driver qualifications, hours of service, and vehicle safety rather than cargo details. But I answered honestly, figuring they might be conducting some kind of special investigation. Another officer asked me about my route and whether I made this run regularly. He wanted to know what days of the week I usually traveled this highway and whether I ever carried different types of cargo. Again, these seemed like strange questions for a routine DOT inspection, but I cooperated because I had nothing to hide. The inspection of my truck took much longer than normal. Usually, a DOT inspection takes 30 to 45 minutes, but these officers spent over 2 hours going through my vehicle. They were particularly interested in my sleeper berth and the storage compartments, searching through my personal belongings with an intensity that seemed excessive. They also spent a lot of time examining the lumber in my trailer, measuring boards and taking photographs. What really started to worry me was the way they were communicating with each other. Real DOT officers are usually very professional and systematic in their inspections, but these men were whispering to each other and making phone calls in voices too low for me to hear. At one point, I saw one of them talking on a radio, but he was speaking in what sounded like coded language rather than the standard terminology that law enforcement uses. Around midnight, one of the officers told me that they needed to conduct a more detailed inspection of my cargo, and that I would have to wait while they unloaded and examined every piece of lumber in my trailer. This was highly unusual since due inspections rarely involve unloading cargo unless there is a specific safety concern. I asked to see their supervisor, but they told me he was not available and that I had no choice but to comply. While they were unloading my trailer, I noticed several things that made me increasingly suspicious. First, there were no other due vehicles at the facility, which was strange since weigh stations usually have at least one official patrol car on site. Second, the equipment they were using to move my lumber looked more like construction equipment than the specialized gear that DOT inspectors normally use. Most importantly, I could see into the office building, and there were no computers or official due forms visible, just some basic furniture and communication equipment. That was when I realized I needed to call for help. I walked back to my truck to get my cell phone, but when I tried to make a call, I discovered that there was no signal. This was not unusual in rural areas, but it seemed like a convenient coincidence that the cell towers were not working at this particular location. I tried my CB radio, but I could not raise any other drivers on the normal channels. As I was trying to figure out what to do, I overheard a conversation between two of the fake officers that made my blood run cold. They were talking about processing the current load and preparing the cargo for transfer. One of them mentioned something about the buyers in California and the usual pickup point near the border. I realized with growing horror that these were not due inspectors at all. They were cargo thieves who had set up a fake weigh station to steal valuable loads from trucks. But it got worse. As I listened more carefully, I heard them talking about the driver situation and disposal protocols. They were not just planning to steal my lumber, they were planning to get rid of me as a witness. I heard one of them say that they had handled 3 drivers already this month, and that the desert is a good place to make people disappear. My heart was pounding as I realized that I was not dealing with simple cargo theft. These were killers who had murdered other truck drivers and were planning to do the same to me. I looked around the facility and noticed for the first time that there were several pieces of heavy equipment parked behind the building, including a backhoe that could be used to dig graves in the desert. I knew I had to get out of there, but my truck was blocked in by their equipment, and there were at least 4 armed men at the facility. I decided to try a desperate gamble. I walked back to the office and told them that I was feeling sick and needed to use the bathroom. They directed me to a portable toilet behind the building, which gave me a chance to see more of their operation. What I saw behind that building will haunt me for the rest of my life. There were 3 trucks parked there with out-of-state license plates, all of them apparently abandoned. One of them had damage to the driver's side door that looked like bullet holes. Near the trucks were several large plastic tarps spread on the ground, and I could see dark stains that I was afraid to identify. I also saw that they had a radio setup that was much more sophisticated than what you would expect at a legitimate weigh station. They had equipment for monitoring CB radio traffic and what looked like radio jammers that could block cell phone signals. This was a well-planned operation that had been designed to intercept and rob trucks and probably to eliminate any witnesses. I knew I had only minutes before they finished unloading my truck and decided what to do with me. I slipped back to my cab and started the engine as quietly as I could. The keys were still in the ignition, and thankfully the engine turned over on the first try. I put the truck in gear and drove straight through the fence at the back of the facility, crashing through the chain link and racing across the desert. Behind me, I could hear shouting and the sound of vehicles starting up. In my mirrors, I could see headlights following me as I bounced and lurched across the rough desert terrain. My truck was not designed for off-road driving, but adrenaline and desperation kept me pushing forward through the sagebrush and rocky ground. I drove across country for about 20 minutes following what looked like an old mining road, until I reached Highway 97, about 5 mi south of the fake weigh station. I flagged down the first vehicle I saw, which happened to be a Oregon State Police patrol car, and told the trooper everything that had happened. The response was immediate and massive. Within an hour, there were dozens of law enforcement vehicles converging on the area, including FBI agents, Oregon State Police, and local sheriff's deputies. But when they reached the location where the weigh station had been, they found nothing. The buildings were gone, the equipment was gone, and there was no sign that anything had ever been there except for some tire tracks in the hole in the fence where I had escaped. However, they did find evidence that confirmed my story. There were 3 abandoned trucks hidden in a ravine about 2 mi from the way station location, and all 3 drivers were listed as missing persons. The investigation revealed that the trucks had been stolen, and the drivers had apparently been murdered. Just as I had overheard the fake officers planning to do to me, the FBI told me that they had been investigating a series of truck hijackings and driver disappearances along Highway 97 for over a year. The criminal organization was using portable buildings and equipment to set up temporary fake way stations at different locations, then moving the entire operation when they thought law enforcement was getting close. They would steal valuable cargo and kill the drivers to eliminate witnesses. According to the FBI, I was probably saved by the fact that lumber is not as valuable as some other types of cargo. So, they were taking their time to decide whether it was worth the risk of murder. If I had been hauling electronics or pharmaceuticals, they probably would have killed me immediately and disappeared with the cargo. The investigation led to the arrest of 7 people involved in the hijacking ring, including 2 former DO employees who had provided them with official uniforms and equipment. They were also connected to similar operations in Nevada and California, and the FBI estimated that they had stolen millions of dollars worth of cargo and killed at least 12 truck drivers over a 2-year period. During the trial, I learned more details about their operation that made me realize how close I had come to death. They had been monitoring CB radio traffic to identify valuable loads, then setting up fake way stations at locations where they could intercept specific trucks. They had sophisticated equipment for jamming cell phone signals and radios, and they had contingency plans for disposing of drivers and vehicles in remote desert locations. The experience changed my entire approach to trucking. I now carry multiple communication devices, including a satellite phone that cannot be jammed by local radio equipment. I have detailed maps of all official way stations on my regular routes. And if I encounter a way station that is not on my maps, I drive past it and report the location to authorities. I also installed a GPS tracking system that automatically updates my location every few minutes. So if something happens to me, law enforcement will know exactly where to look. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts. If something feels wrong about an official stop or inspection, it probably is wrong. Real DOT officers follow standard procedures and ask standard questions. If someone claiming to be a DOT officer starts asking unusual questions about cargo or routes, or if the facility does not look like other way stations you have seen, it is better to be suspicious and wrong than to be trusting and dead. The worst part of the whole experience is knowing that there are probably other criminal organizations out there using similar tactics. How many truck drivers have disappeared on remote highways, officially listed as missing persons, but actually murdered by hijackers posing as law enforcement? How many fake way stations and inspection points are operating right now, waiting for the next unsuspecting driver to stop? Since my experience, I have heard from other drivers who have encountered suspicious way stations or inspection points that did not seem legitimate. Some of them drove past and reported the locations to authorities, but others stopped and were robbed or worse. The trucking industry needs to do more to educate drivers about these threats and to help them identify legitimate law enforcement facilities. I still drive Highway 97 regularly, but I'm much more careful about where I stop and who I trust. Every time I see a way station sign, I check my maps to make sure it is supposed to be there. Every time I interact with someone claiming to be a DOT officer, I pay attention to their questions and procedures. And every time I drive past that section of desert where the fake way station was located, I remember how close I came to becoming another missing person statistic. The road can be a dangerous place, but the real danger is not always other drivers or mechanical failures. Sometimes the real danger comes from people who use our trust in authority and our willingness to follow the rules as weapons against us. That is a lesson that every truck driver needs to learn before it is too